This story begins and ends with a man looking out to sea. But this isn't a story about some man just walking his dog on the beach. The man in this story who's looking out to sea is one of history's most accomplished and greatest individuals. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon, over the space of 20 years, he came from a humble beginning in Corsica to rise all the way to the top as the Emperor of France. And over those 20 years he'd led military battles that had conquered most of Europe and made him the master of all he surveyed. However, by 1814 the tide was turning, and the allied nations of Europe had surrounded him in Paris. But they were left with a problem. Do you kill him, make a martyr out of him? Or do you send him somewhere where he can never cause any more trouble again? They decided to send him to the island of Elba in the Mediterranean. Surrounded by Allied warships, it was presumed that Napoleon would never leave the island and that he would be safe in his island prison, a kind of very sunny Alcatraz. However, they underestimated this man. This was Napoleon, a man with photographic memory, a man who could analyse military strategy like no one has ever lived before or after, and a man who looked at Europe not as a myriad of different countries and different people, but as a game of chess that he was the supreme grand master of. And so one day he decided, with his small band of men, to escape and relaunch his military career. He escaped from Elba and landed in Cannes in France. Town to town he went to, more and more people ran to join their former emperor and relive the glory days of the Napoleonic regime. But there was a problem. He was grossly outnumbered. One of his former field marshals, Field Marshal Ney, a friend of Napoleon, who'd been at his side through all the great battles and defeats over the last 20 years, was now working for the King of France, King Louis. Ney said to King Louis, "I will bring this man back in an iron cage." And he set off with 6,000 men to confront Napoleon. Remember, he was outnumbered. Across a field, 6,000 men pointed guns at Napoleon's small band of men. Napoleon, not wanting to have his men massacred, and shown the sheer charisma of the former emperor, stepped forward into the middle of the battlefield. He looked at Ney's men and ripped open his shirt and said to them, "If they want to shoot, shoot. Shoot and kill the emperor now." Silence descended across the battlefield. Not a sound was heard. All of a sudden, Ney's men started to shout, "Napoleon!" and threw down their weapons and ran towards their former emperor, crying and hugging him. Even Ney couldn't face shooting him, and he broke down and ran towards his former friend and hugged him. And so his army grew and grew. Of course, we know how the story ends. Napoleon, after becoming emperor again within 100 days, was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo. But that's not really the point of this story. This point in the story illustrates the charisma, the power, the magnitude of this man who was not big in stature, this man who came from humble beginnings but yet mastered the whole of Europe. Of course, after the Battle of Waterloo, the Allies faced a similar problem. Do we kill and make a martyr of him? Or do we send him somewhere else where he can never escape? They decided to send him to St. Helena, an island in the middle of the Atlantic. And so the story ends with Napoleon stood on another beach, looking out at another sea, wondering what his next move was. Of course, he never got that chance, and he died a number of years later. But this was the story of one of the greatest men who has ever lived, Napoleon Bonaparte.